Emily stood nervously at the edge of the bustling arena, clutching Max's leash with a hand that trembled ever so slightly. Her heart pounded in her chest as she gazed at the competitors around her. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the noise of excited chatter. The polished, show-ready dogs pranced around, their coats gleaming under the stadium lights, while their owners moved with the grace of seasoned professionals. Emily felt a twinge of self-doubt. She wasn't from a long line of dog show experts. Her training had been different, more raw, more personal. Max was a German shepherd, yes, but his coat was far from the sleek, perfectly groomed fur of the show dogs around them. His ears weren't always in perfect position, and he still had a few stubborn habits, like pulling on a leash when excited, that Emily hadn't completely trained out of him. But what he lacked in refinement, he made up for in spirit. Max was Emily's best friend, and they had spent countless hours together, training in their backyard, running through fields, learning together. Still, she could feel the stares. The more experienced competitors eyed them skeptically, whispering to each other with snickers. One woman with a perfectly manicured poodle by her side glanced over at Emily and rolled her eyes. "She'll never last," she muttered just loud enough for Emily to hear. Her voice dripped with condescension. Emily flinched but kept her chin up. She refused to let the mockery break her resolve. She wasn't there to impress anyone with fancy tricks or polished performances. She was there because she believed in Max. More than that, she believed in the bond they had forged. No one else knew the hours they'd spent together, the way Max had taught her the true meaning of patience and trust. Emily didn't need the approval of the other competitors. All she needed was Max. As the announcer called for the first group of competitors to line up, Emily walked into the ring, keeping her head high. Max wagged his tail excitedly, oblivious to the attention they were attracting. She crouched down to his level, brushing her fingers through his thick fur. "We've got this, buddy," she whispered. Max looked up at her with those soulful brown eyes, tail still wagging, as if to say, "I trust you." The first obstacle course was set. It was a series of jumps, tunnels, and weaves, basic challenges that many of the seasoned dogs had mastered long ago. The experienced competitors went first, showcasing flawless precision. Their dogs leaped over jumps as though they had done it 1,000 times before, their movements as smooth as silk. Emily couldn't help but feel a pang of anxiety as she watched them. Would Max be able to keep up? Then it was their turn. Emily took a deep breath and signaled to Max. The crowd seemed to grow quieter, the tension building as they waited for Emily and Max to begin. Emily felt the weight of their eyes on her, but she quickly pushed that aside. This wasn't about them. It was about her and Max. Max bounded forward, eager to get started, but when they reached the first jump, something unexpected happened. Max hesitated. His feet hovered in front of the obstacle as if unsure of the distance. Emily's heart skipped a beat. For a split second, she thought he might turn away, back out, and just sit down on the grass. But then, with a sudden burst of energy, Max leaped over the jump, clearing it with a single fluid motion. It wasn't perfect. He landed with a slight stumble, but he had done it, and Emily felt a rush of pride swell in her chest. The crowd didn't cheer, but she didn't need their applause. Max had done it. They were in this together, and that was all that mattered. As Emily and Max continued through the course, their bond became undeniable. Max had a way of listening to her, his ears twitching whenever she gave a quiet command. Even though the other dogs executed their obstacles with near perfection, there was something raw and genuine about Emily and Max's partnership. They were a team, one that didn't rely on flawless execution, but on mutual trust and understanding. The next challenge was a slalom of poles, narrow enough that the dogs had to weave in and out without knocking them over. Max hesitated at first, his eyes flicking between Emily and the poles. The other dogs had no issue, their movements sharp and precise. One after another, they glided through the weave poles, their owners guiding them effortlessly. Emily's heart raced. She knew that if Max couldn't make it through this, they might as well pack up and go home. But then she remembered something. Max wasn't just any dog. He had an incredible drive. He loved to work, to please her, even when the task seemed daunting. With a steady voice, she whispered, "Come on, buddy. We've got this." Max perked up, his tail wagging in excitement, and as if on cue, he darted toward the first pole. He nudged the first one with his shoulder and, with a burst of energy, weaved in and out with surprising agility. Emily's eyes widened with disbelief as Max gracefully maneuvered through the poles, not knocking a single one over. It wasn't perfect. He bumped into a few poles, but they remained upright. Yet he kept going, faster now, with a determination she hadn't seen before. The crowd, who had been so quick to dismiss them earlier, began to murmur, some with surprise, others with admiration. The judges looked at each other, their expressions unreadable. Emily couldn't tell if they were impressed or simply holding back their thoughts. But one thing was certain, Max was proving that he belonged here, that his spirit was something no polished show dog could replicate. He didn't need perfection to impress people. All he needed was Emily, and Emily needed him. They were a team in every sense of the word. As they cleared the final pole and made their way to the next part of the course, Emily allowed herself a small smile. She could feel the change in the air. The whispers of doubt were slowly being replaced by whispers of curiosity. People were starting to wonder if Max had what it took to go all the way. But just as quickly as their momentum had built, Emily noticed something in the corner of her eye. Some of the other competitors were starting to look uneasy. A tall man with a golden retriever, who had been confidently breezing through the course, glanced over at Emily with a furrowed brow. He had been the one who had openly laughed when she first entered the arena, clearly judging her as an underdog with no chance. Now he seemed less sure. The other competitors who had been dismissive were watching them more closely. For the first time that day, Emily felt a surge of confidence. She wasn't just there to compete, she was there to show everyone that she and Max could hold their own, no matter what anyone thought of them. With a quiet nod to Max, she signaled him toward the next obstacle, a series of small hurdles that required both precision and speed. Max, now completely in sync with Emily's movements, bounded forward, his paws light on the ground, eyes bright with focus. It wasn't going to be easy, but Emily knew as they approached the final hurdle that they had already made their mark. The competition wasn't just about perfection, it was about heart, and Emily and Max had more than enough of that. The next obstacle was a series of jumps, high, narrow, and spaced far apart. It would test both Max's agility and his ability to stay focused under pressure. As Emily looked ahead, she noticed some of the more experienced competitors exchanging quick glances. They had already been through the course and were now waiting for their turn at the jumps, their dogs prepared and polished. The air was thick with anticipation, but Emily focused solely on Max. This was their moment. Max could sense the energy in the air as they approached the first jump. He paused for just a second, looking up at Emily, as if to check that he was doing the right thing. Emily smiled softly, her eyes steady, and gave a reassuring nod. "You've got this, buddy." She could feel the bond they shared in that moment. Max wasn't just her dog. He was her partner, her equal. She trusted him completely. The first jump came into view. Max leaped effortlessly over it, his form clean and graceful, but the crowd remained quiet. It wasn't a perfect jump, but it was clean enough. Emily's heart surged with pride. They were moving forward, step by step, jump by jump. Max's enthusiasm was contagious, and Emily could feel her nerves beginning to settle. They were in it together, no matter how the rest of the course played out. As they continued through the obstacles, Emily noticed something remarkable. The other competitors, those who had once snickered or whispered behind their backs, were beginning to watch them more closely. The seasoned trainers, the owners with their impeccably trained dogs, were starting to shift their focus. They hadn't expected this. Emily and Max were no longer just the underdogs. They were a threat. Max's next jump was higher, the bar set a little higher than the previous one. The challenge wasn't just about clearing the height, it was about control, focus, and the precision with which Max could make the leap. Emily could see the doubt in some of the other contestants' eyes as they watched the pair approach. With a burst of energy, Max soared through the air, clearing the jump with a perfect arc. He landed gracefully, his paws barely touching the ground as he bounced forward with excitement. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Emily heard the soft gasp of surprise from the crowd, followed by the beginning of applause. The first sign of recognition. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. Max's determination was starting to make an impact, not just on the judges, but on everyone around them. Emily felt a wave of emotion rush over her. The whispers and laughter that had once followed them were now replaced with a growing respect. As they neared the next part of the course, Emily could see more and more people lean forward in their seats, watching closely. It wasn't just the judges anymore. The crowd had started to notice too. The underdog pair was starting to show what they were made of, and the energy in the arena shifted. Emily had no idea what the outcome would be, but in that moment, something deep inside her told her that they had already won. Not in the way people expected, but in the way that mattered most, by proving to themselves and everyone else that heart, determination, and the bond between a girl and her dog could make all the difference. Max gave one last, excited bark, looking up at Emily with pride in his eyes. She knew that, whatever happened next, they had already stunned the crowd, and herself, in ways she hadn't thought possible. The final section of the course loomed ahead, and it was going to be their biggest challenge yet. It was a large, complicated obstacle filled with hurdles, tunnels, and tight turns. Dogs would need to demonstrate not just skill but confidence. The crowd had grown quiet again, the tension palpable. Most of the dogs had breezed through the earlier obstacles, and now the show was down to the final few. Emily could feel the pressure mounting, but as she looked at Max, she knew they could do it. Max was tired, his breaths heavy, but there was a fire in his eyes. He wasn't just following commands now. He was thinking, anticipating, and responding in ways that surprised even Emily. She had trained him hard, but it was moments like these, when the stakes were high and the crowd was watching, that Max really showed his true potential. They were more than just a girl and her dog. They were a partnership, an inseparable team. The first challenge in this final section was a tunnel, long and narrow. It was tricky because most dogs would hesitate before entering, unsure of the dark space ahead. Emily had seen it all before. Dogs would sometimes balk, unwilling to go through, and their handlers would coax them out of fear of losing time. Emily knew Max could do this, but she could feel the doubt creeping in. What if this was the moment that broke their momentum? As they approached the tunnel, Max hesitated, just like she feared he might. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. For a moment, it felt like the whole world had slowed down. Emily knelt down beside him and placed her hand gently on his head. "We've got this," she whispered, her voice steady, calm. Max seemed to hear the trust in her voice, because with a soft woof, he took a step forward and disappeared into the tunnel. The crowd held its breath. For a split second, Emily couldn't see him, but then she heard the soft thudding of his paws, the sound of him moving forward with determination. As Max emerged from the other side, the crowd let out a collective sigh of relief. He was through, and he was on his way to the next challenge. Emily's heart skipped a beat, and she gave him an encouraging smile. They were still in this. The next obstacle was a series of narrow jumps, one after another, that tested both precision and speed. Max's legs were growing tired, but his focus had never been sharper. He seemed to sense the importance of this moment. Emily wasn't sure how, but it felt like he was pushing through the exhaustion for her. They had come this far, and now they had to finish strong. Max cleared the first jump effortlessly. The crowd, who had been so skeptical just moments before, began to murmur in admiration. It wasn't just the way he jumped, it was the way he did it with such purpose, as if he knew exactly what was at stake. Emily's breath quickened, but she focused on guiding him through each hurdle. There was no room for mistakes. Not now. Max sailed over the next few jumps with a grace that took Emily's breath away. They were getting closer to the final stretch. The pressure was on, but Emily felt an overwhelming sense of pride. They were no longer the underdogs. They were proving that sometimes all it takes is a leap of faith and a whole lot of heart. With one final jump, Max soared through the air, clearing the highest hurdle yet. The crowd erupted into applause, but Emily barely heard them. She was too focused on the way Max landed, his paws light as air, landing with a precision that matched any seasoned competitor. It wasn't perfect, But it was enough. They had done it. The bond they shared, the unspoken trust between them, had carried them through. As they approached the finish line, the world seemed to fade away. Emily's heart swelled with pride, not for the applause, not for the victory, but because she knew, deep down, that this moment was theirs, and no one could take that away. As Emily and Max crossed the final hurdle, the crowd's applause was overwhelming. It wasn't just polite clapping anymore, it was genuine admiration. Emily's heart raced, but she didn't dare take her eyes off Max. He had given his all, and now, as they stood at the end of the course, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. For the first time since they had stepped onto that field, she realized they had proven something. They belonged. The judges, who had been watching intently, exchanged quiet words among themselves. Emily couldn't hear what they were saying, but the look on their faces had changed. Gone were the expressions of skepticism. Now they seemed intrigued, thoughtful. She could tell that they were evaluating Max not just as a dog, but as a symbol of something deeper: perseverance, trust, and the power of a bond that couldn't be broken. Emily took a deep breath, her chest swelling with pride, as she reached down to pet Max, his fur damp with sweat. He looked up at her with those soulful brown eyes, his tail wagging slowly. She could tell he was tired, but he was also happy. They had made it this far together. The next challenge was the toughest one yet. It was an intricate series of obstacles, combining elements of all the earlier tests: jumps, tunnels, and even a high-wire platform that required Max to balance carefully before jumping down to the next level. It was a challenge designed to separate the best from the rest, and for a brief moment, Emily wondered if they were truly ready for it. But as she glanced down at Max, who was already wagging his tail, eager to move forward, she realized something. They had come this far because of their connection. Max wasn't just a dog. He was her partner, and together, they could face anything. The crowd had quieted once again as the next competitors prepared for their turn. The seasoned handlers moved with calculated confidence, their dogs seeming almost robotic in their perfection. Yet even though their dogs performed flawlessly, there was something that felt mechanical, as though there was no real connection between the handler and the dog. In contrast, Emily and Max were something different. They were driven by love, trust, and mutual respect, qualities that couldn't be measured in points or perfection. As they approached the first part of the challenge, a series of hurdles designed to test Max's speed and precision, Emily could feel the tension rising. Max was still a little fatigued from the earlier obstacles, but his eyes remained sharp, and his tail didn't stop wagging. Emily whispered softly to him, "Let's show them what we can do, buddy." She could feel the bond between them tighten, and with a deep breath, she gave the signal. Max surged forward, his powerful legs carrying him over the first hurdle with ease. He landed lightly on the other side, barely pausing before springing over the next one. The crowd, who had been silent for the past few minutes, couldn't hold back any longer. A murmur of approval rippled through the stands as they saw what was unfolding before them. Not a perfectly trained show dog, but a dog who had the spirit to go above and beyond what anyone had expected. Emily and Max were no longer the underdogs. They were proving they belonged on this stage, alongside the best. The next obstacle was the tunnel, a long, dark space that would challenge Max's confidence and trust in Emily. As they reached the entrance, Max hesitated for just a second, glancing back at her as if asking for reassurance. Emily crouched down to his level, looking him in the eye. "You've got this, Max. I'm right here." With a final glance, Max darted into the tunnel, his paws moving quickly against the floor. For a brief moment, Emily couldn't see him, but she didn't worry. She knew Max would emerge on the other side. And sure enough, just as she was beginning to wonder, Max shot out from the tunnel, landing gracefully on his paws. The crowd erupted into cheers. Emily's chest swelled with pride. Max had made it look easy, even though she knew how difficult it had been. The connection between them was undeniable. Max was not just following commands. He was trusting Emily in every sense of the word. The high-wire platform loomed ahead, and the challenge was only getting tougher. Emily watched as the other competitors struggled to keep their dogs balanced, some losing precious seconds as their animals wobbled or hesitated. Max, however, seemed undeterred. With Emily's steady encouragement, he placed his paws on the narrow surface and, with surprising calm, began to make his way across. The platform wobbled slightly under his weight, but Max moved forward with quiet determination, his focus sharp. Emily's heart raced as they neared the end of the platform. Max had reached the final stretch, his paws steady and secure. She could hear the crowd holding their breath, but in that moment, it was just her and Max, one heartbeat, one step at a time. As he cleared the final jump, the audience exploded in applause, and Emily couldn't contain the smile that spread across her face. They had done it. The obstacles, the doubts, and the fears, all of them had been conquered. Emily didn't need a trophy to prove their worth. Max had already shown her that they were winners, no matter the outcome. Together, they had taken on the impossible and emerged victorious. They had proven that heart, trust, and determination could outshine even the most polished performances. As Emily and Max stood at the finish line, basking in the glow of their achievement, she realized that the real reward wasn't a ribbon or a trophy. It was the bond they had forged, the moments of quiet trust that no one else could see. And in that moment, they were the champions, regardless of what the judges would decide. The final round was upon them. The judges stood at the far end of the course, their expressions serious, almost unreadable. The other competitors had already made their way through the obstacles, some with flawless execution, others with minor mistakes. The tension in the air was thick, and Emily could feel her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the last challenge, the one that would determine whether they would leave with more than just pride, or if the perfectionists would take the day. Max, however, wasn't showing signs of the nerves that were tightening in Emily's stomach. He stood by her side, his tail wagging slowly, eyes alert. Emily reached down to give him a quick scratch behind the ears, her fingers grazing his soft fur. He looked up at her, as if to say, "Let's do this." Emily smiled, her confidence in him surging. They had already accomplished so much together. Now it was just a matter of finishing what they had started. The course ahead of them was complicated. A long ramp led up to a series of weaving poles, followed by a set of broad jumps and a series of tight turns before the final obstacle, a high vertical wall that most of the other dogs had been struggling with. It was a steep challenge, both mentally and physically, but Emily wasn't about to let fear or doubt take hold now. Max had carried her through every hurdle, every obstacle, and every moment of uncertainty. She knew he could do it. As the announcer called their names, the crowd went silent in anticipation. Emily felt the eyes of the entire arena on them, but she blocked out the noise. She had one focus: Max. "We're in this together," she whispered to him as they took their first steps toward the starting line. Max looked up at her, his body shifting slightly, his muscles poised and ready to spring into action. There was no hesitation in his movement, only purpose. The ramp loomed ahead, steep and intimidating. Emily's breath caught in her throat for a moment as she remembered the first time they had practiced this. Max had struggled, unsure of how to navigate the incline. But today, he was different. He was stronger, faster, and more focused than ever before. She gave him a soft command: "Climb, Max." With a smooth, fluid motion, Max surged forward, his paws finding their grip as he scaled the ramp with precision. The crowd gasped in awe as he reached the top in record time, the speed and confidence in his movements surprising everyone. Emily's heart swelled with pride. This is it, she thought, as they reached the weaving poles. Max darted through the poles with agility, his body moving like a well-oiled machine, effortlessly gliding in and out of each space. Emily held her breath as he maneuvered, but there was no doubt in her mind now. Max was not just overcoming the obstacles, he was showing the world who he was, a champion in his own right. The broad jumps came next, spaced wide enough to make them a challenge for any dog. As Max approached the first jump, Emily gave him a subtle signal, and he launched himself into the air, his body soaring effortlessly over the bar. He cleared the jump with ease, landing softly and moving swiftly toward the next one. The crowd reacted with growing astonishment. The other competitors who had watched with skepticism earlier were now watching with wide eyes. They weren't just seeing a girl and her dog anymore. They were seeing a team, unpredictable, full of heart, and capable of anything. But there was still the final obstacle, the towering wall. It was a daunting height, and the other dogs had struggled to climb it, requiring multiple attempts or heavy encouragement from their handlers. As Emily and Max approached, she could feel her own nerves returning, but she kept her focus on Max. He was ready for this. Emily steadied her breath and whispered, "One last jump, Max. We can do this." With a final burst of energy, Max took off, his body flying toward the wall. He hit it with perfect timing, his paws finding footholds on the smooth surface, and with one powerful push, he soared to the top. The crowd let out a collective cheer as Max reached the summit, landing on the other side with grace and precision. They had done it. Emily didn't need to look at the judges, didn't need to wait for their decision. Max had already shown the world everything they needed to see: raw talent, unwavering trust, and an undeniable bond. As they crossed the finish line together, Emily's heart soared with happiness. It didn't matter what place they came in now. They had proven something far more valuable than any trophy or ribbon. Together, they had defied the odds and overcome every challenge that came their way. And that, in the end, was the true victory. The applause that erupted was louder than anything Emily had ever heard before, but all she could hear was Max's excited bark as he looked up at her, his eyes shining with joy. They had arrived as underdogs, but they were leaving as champions. The moment Max's paws touched the ground on the other side of the wall, the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't just a cheer, it was an overwhelming roar of approval, the kind reserved for the truly remarkable. Emily's legs felt weak beneath her, but the pride swelling in her chest kept her upright. Her eyes found Max, who was panting with joy, his tail wagging furiously. He looked up at her, as if to say, "We did it." And they had. They had done the impossible. The judges stood quietly, exchanging a few words, their eyes scanning the course and then shifting toward Emily and Max. For a moment, the air seemed to hang in suspension. Every competitor, every spectator, was waiting for the final verdict. Emily held her breath, her heart racing. She didn't care about the ribbon or the trophy. She had already won. But in that moment, she felt the weight of all the eyes upon her. Would they acknowledge what she and Max had accomplished? The announcer stepped forward, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And now for the final results. He began, his voice carrying through the stadium. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. The other competitors, though impressed, were clearly not expecting to hear what came next. The first-place winner of today's event, the announcer continued, is Emily and her German Shepherd, Max. The words hit her like a wave, sweeping her into an overwhelming sea of emotions. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. The applause grew louder, and the sound of Max's excited barking filled her ears. It was surreal. For a brief moment, she just stood there, stunned, unable to process what was happening. But then, as Max bounded toward her, she realized the truth. This wasn't just a victory. It was a testament to everything they had worked for, everything they had overcome together. Max was by her side in an instant, and Emily bent down to wrap her arms around his neck, laughing through the happy tears that had suddenly sprung to her eyes. "We did it, buddy. We really did it," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. As they walked to the center of the arena to collect their prize, the applause was deafening. The other competitors who had once looked at her with skepticism were now applauding too, nodding in silent respect. The seasoned trainers who had doubted them, the owners of the perfectly polished show dogs, everyone was acknowledging the undeniable bond between Emily and Max. It wasn't just about the skills they had showcased. It was the heart, the unwavering trust, the determination that had carried them to the top. Max, ever the showman, looked up at Emily with a playful glint in his eyes. His tongue hung out, and he looked almost as if he were smiling too. The crowd cheered again, this time recognizing not just his performance, but his spirit. He wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of resilience, of believing in something bigger than yourself, even when the world didn't. When Emily and Max reached the podium to receive their prize, a shiny, gleaming trophy, she could hardly believe it. The judges congratulated them, each one offering praise not just for Max's performance, but for the way they had approached the entire competition. There was something raw and genuine about their bond that had touched everyone present. As they left the stage, trophy in hand, Emily glanced down at Max, her faithful partner. She thought back to the doubts she had carried with her into the arena, about herself, about Max, about their place in a world that seemed so focused on perfection. She realized then that the only thing that mattered wasn't perfection. It was the love they had for each other, the trust they shared, and the courage to defy the odds. Walking away from the competition, the cheers still ringing in her ears, Emily knew this was only the beginning. They had shown the world that sometimes the greatest victories come not from flawless performances, but from the heart, the drive to keep going no matter what, and the belief that together, anything was possible. Max looked up at her again, his eyes full of pride, and Emily smiled through her tears. They had made it, and they would continue to make it, side by side, no matter where the road took them.